Well, good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to this evening's Grand Canyon Historical Society virtual outing. I'm Tom Sulpizio, president of the Grand Canyon Historical Society this year, and it is with great pleasure that I welcome our uh, fellow board member and vice president, Davy Crockett, who will present early development of Grand Canyon's North Rim, including the historic lodge. The Grand Canyon Historical Society mission statement is shown here. We celebrate and promote the study and preservation of the Grand Canyon region's cultural and natural history for the education and enjoyment of its members and the public. I should add, and we add on this chart, that GCHS is the official National Park Service partner at the Grand Canyon for interpretation and educational services. Please consider becoming a member if you're not one already. The dues are only $35 per year. We're an all-volunteer organization, so please join us so we can continue to expand our many activities like these regular virtual outings. Just go to grandcanyon.org, click on Join or Donate at the top of the homepage, and it's all pretty self-explanatory. So it's with great pleasure, I want to introduce Davy Crockett. Again, tonight he will present his work on early development of the Grand Canyon North Rim, including the historic lodge. Just as an aside, if you happen to be a member and receive the fall issue of the Old Pioneer, which has been renamed Grand Canyon History, Davy wrote the lead article in that magazine, and it's an excellent 5-page piece with 40 references, really a great companion to what he will present tonight. So Davy is a board member of the Grand Canyon Historical Society and its vice president. He's also the executive director of the American Ultrarunning Hall of Fame and the race director of a foot race on the historic Pony Express route, and the recognized world historian for the sport of ultra running. He is the author of 20 books, including the best-selling Grand Canyon Rim to Rim History. He resides in Utah, has been to the North Rim dozens of times, and has run or hiked more than 1,000 miles in the inner canyon. I'm exhausted just reciting that, let alone the 1,000 miles. And professionally, Davy is a retired IT professional with a computer science degree from BYU. And I must say that Davy's work with the society over the past year and a half has literally brought us so far along in terms of social media, in terms of our digital footprint. And we can thank him and some others for that fine work that they've done. So I will turn the meeting over to Davy.
Tom mentioned my book. Much of what I'll be covering today is actually told in my book, and it's called The Grand Canyon Rim to Rim History, and you can get it on Amazon. I'll show many pictures that are not in the book. I keep updating the book, and if you bought the book a couple of years ago, I've added more than 50 pages of history, so you might want to get another copy. Well, first, I want to thank David Croft, who sent me many of the photos you will see. His grandfather, George Croft, worked and helped construct many of the North Rim facilities in the 1930s. Other photos came from the digital archives preserved by the Union Pacific's Utah Parks Company, located at Southern Utah University in Cedar City, Utah. And also photos from the Union Pacific Railway Museum. Also, some photos are from the National Archives and, of course, the Grand Canyon National Park Museum. The North Rim provides amazing remote beauty, very differently compared to the South Rim. And today it remains largely undeveloped with forests that are about 1,500 feet higher than the South Rim. Most people have the mistaken impression that the North Rim was developed like the South Rim by the Fred Harvey Company and by the Santa Fe Railroad. It was not. It was developed largely by people from Utah, which is where I live. And so I have a little bias about wanting to give Utah some credit. Well, the enormous, nearly impossible gorge of the Grand Canyon was a natural boundary between Utah and Arizona. And some of us from Utah wish that the state boundary would have been along the canyon, because even today we feel that the North Rim has an important part of Utah's history. The trip by wagon between the two rims, it's only about 10 miles as the crows fly apart, involves hundreds of miles. You got to go way around into Nevada to get around back then, or eventually using the Lee's ferry. If the ferry wasn't operational, you could come around. So it's very difficult for people from Arizona, northern or southern Arizona to even get to the North Rim in the early days. In the 1880s, John W. Young, who was the son of the Mormon leader Brigham Young, came up with the idea to make the Kaibab Plateau near the North Rim into a private recreation area and hunting grounds. He acquired land there and stocked it with cattle and horses. And then Dan Sigmiller of Kanab, Utah, was placed in charge of the operation. Well, the plans failed, but others in Utah took over to make the forest into a cattle range. In 1896, Sigmiller drove a white top rig to Milford, Utah, which was the end of the railroad, and picked up a hunting party from New York and escorted them over the Kaibab to the north rim of the Grand Canyon and back to Milford. And so that was kind of one of the early tourists or hunting parties that made it clear to the North Rim. Well, in 1902, Edwin D. Woolley, the Mormon leader in Kanab, Utah, started to pursue a vision to allow horse travel across the Grand Canyon rim to rim in only about 23 miles compared to possibly hundreds of miles, by wagon around it. And he and James Emmett of Lee's Ferry explored the head of Bright Angel Canyon on the North Rim. Well, they found some game trails that helped them descend Bright Angel Creek and concluded that a trail could be made. He hoped that such a trail could connect with the Bright Angel Trail coming down from the South Rim and thus create one Bright Angel Trail that went rim to rim. So sometimes you get confused because in the early days, the trail coming from the North Rim was also called Bright Angel Trail. Today, we call that route the old Bright Angel Trail. It's totally different than the North Kaibab Trail, which is used today. So in 1903, Woolley formed the Grand Canyon Transportation Company and started hacking out some rock and vegetation. The rough trail zigzagged down a steep ridge 2 miles to the creek bottoms. And here's a map that kind of explains that. So the current North Kaibab Trail near Roaring Springs, goes up Roaring Springs Canyon. It's in the North Kaibab Trail. But the old one that was used for years and years continued up Bright Angel Canyon, just straight up some zigzags and made it up to the top of the rim there. And then they would go around to reach the other places. And I'll talk about Woolley's Camp in a second. So let's see. So yeah, that's what I wanted to show there. So in 1905, Woolley escorted a party of U.S. congressmen to the North Rim by team from Salt Lake City. And it was reported, quote, "The purpose of the trip is to view the Utah side of the Grand Canyon and to consider questions connected with the future of that country and making an immense national game preserve," is what they thought they would do. Well, they held political rallies along the way, and at Kanab, schools were dismissed and a holiday was declared as the congressmen came through. The expedition moved on to the Kaibab and the North Rim, where the distinguished visitors enjoyed the scenery and hunted deer. The trip provided conspicuous advertising for the Grand Canyon, and Woolley hoped to get support for the creation of an automobile road to the North Rim because um, what it was just a maze of cattle trails. Is really what it was, and but he prophesied that someday thousands of tourists would someday visit the canyon by automobile, and this is in 1905. In 1906, Woolley employed his son-in-law, Dave Rust, to lead in the construction of an improved trail down into the canyon from the North Rim. And day after day, they chipped out a graded trail with pickaxes on steep side hills. By mid-August 1906, there was what they called a suitable trail in place from the North Rim to the Colorado River. Although it took nearly 100 creek crossings of Bright Angel Creek to get all the way to the Colorado River. But when they finally got to the Colorado River, the workers celebrated by taking a plunge in the river. So Rust established a camp near today's Phantom Ranch, and it became known as Rust Camp. They developed the camp with irrigation ditches and planted some cottonwood trees by transplanting branches cut from trees found up Phantom Creek. And I thought this picture on the right is pretty interesting to understand exactly where Rust Camp was. So it was not where Phantom Ranch, most of Phantom Ranch is today. It is further down towards the Colorado River. So Brian Cresson did a very good historic then and now picture that helps you see, did it last year or the year before, and helps you see kind of where Rust Camp really was in this old picture here. And today's, or this is when they were working on the new water treatment plant. They had a lot of things that's there, but you can see kind of where it was in relation to the old photos there. Well, Rust crew also went to work on a cable tram across the Colorado River at the location of today's Black Bridge. With this tram, rim-to-rim foot or horse travel became possible without swimming across the dangerous river, and it was completed in 1907. And this opened up the North Rim to many hunters who would make the trip from the South Rim. Many did that. And this picture here, that's the first official crossing in this amazing tram. I believe that's Elwood Kolb is there with two ladies, Harvey girls, who are working at the hotel. Well, up on the North Rim, the main structures were Woolley's cabin near what was called Catalos Spring, and it's about 2.5 miles from today's Bright Angel Point. And also there was a cattle ranch called VT Cattle Ranch near today's Kaibab Lodge, not far from just outside today's park entrance. And they developed kind of a tourist cabin area there at the VT ranch. So other cabins existed, including Uncle Jimmy Owens' cabin near VT Ranch. And Owens came to the North Rim in 1905, and 2 years later became the game warden there. And he was in charge of hunting mountain lions and wolves that had been killing the cattle and the deer. And that's his cabin. He had all sorts of his furs lining the walls, and very famous for his hounds that would go and chase the mountain lions. And in 1905, Charles Buffalo Jones brought a herd of bison to the North Rim of the Grand Canyon, and they were shipped in 2 railway cars to Lund, Utah, and then driven 200 miles on hoof to their new home. And he tried to crossbreed the bison with cattle, hoping that they would make them more durable for hard weather. It didn't quite work out. And most of the bison today, even in many other areas, do have cattle blood in them, but he was definitely doing some crossbreeding here. So descendants of this herd obviously still live on the North Rim, and their numbers are managed by the park, and they did survive the fire, and they're thriving and doing quite well. In 1909, Woolley persuaded his nephew, Gordon Woolley, a broker from Salt Lake City, to conduct a publicity stunt by driving cars all the way to the North Rim. So preparations were made for many weeks before the trip. Uncle Woolley, as he was called, D. Woolley was called, sent out men and teams to fix the worst places in the Kaibab forest roads. He cached 10 gallons of gasoline placed every 30 miles to fill up along the way. And it's really interesting how they tried to do this. The party and 2 autos, included women and children, drove from Salt Lake City and made excellent time, reaching the Kanab in 5 days. The entire town population went out for miles to meet the car. Most of them had never seen an automobile before, so it was just quite an event. And from Kanab, saddle horses, pack animals, tent supplies, wagons, and guides joined the expedition for the final rugged 100 miles. At times, the route could hardly be called a road at all. In the forest, they had to cut down trees at sharp turns and to let their long-bodied machines get through. They had to dig out hundreds of stumps along the way. And after a total of 9 days, they, with nearly 40 hours of driving time, they reached the North Rim at Bright Angel Point and were the first automobiles to accomplish that feat. Well, in 1913, some rugged tourists were heading to the North Rim from Utah by horseback and horse wagons, and a few were trying to get there in automobiles. And to get there without getting lost, they hired guides from Woolley's company because of the various networks of trails, cattle paths, and dirt roads on the Kaibab Plateau. A ranger station was established at today's Jacob Lake, with some cottages and a telephone station. The 80-mile rough dirt road journey from Kanab took the autos 2 days to reach the canyon. Another group on September 7th, 1913, 21 people left Salt Lake City in 8 automobiles attempting to reach the North Rim. And this was highly publicized by the Forest, what it did is it resulted in the Forest Service granting nearly $3,000 for the construction of an automobile road from Jacob Lake to the North Rim. And quote is 20 miles from Kanab, the road traverses the Kaibab forest, and without the aid of an experienced guide, it is impossible to locate the indefinite trail. For miles, the party traveled over a cushion of pine needles several inches thick. They had to stop at Woolley's cabin about 2 miles from the rim because there wasn't a good road to drive on. They went the rest of the way on foot to Bright Angel Point. By 1915, a better road was constructed by the Forest Service, and by 1917, 10-passenger tourist bus from Utah were successfully reaching the North Rim through, although 30 miles of the road were rated as fair. So these photos are the actual photos of the construction crew and company that were trying to improve the road. Looks like this is near the VT Ranch or what is the Kaibab Lodge today. Well, in February 1919, the Grand Canyon National Park was, of course, established. And that year, a primitive auto camp was established that was called the Wiley Way Camp. And it was built at the North Rim, about 100 yards northwest of the future site of the Grand Canyon Lodge. And the sleeping accommodations were wooden floored cabins with canvas roofs, and eventually grew to 54 cabins. And by 1920, various guided trips were available for the general public to ride down into the canyon. From the North Rim, for $5, you could ride a horse down to the river and back on a 3-day trip. In 1927, construction began on a beautiful, spacious Spanish-style lodge on the North Rim at Bright Angel Point. It was architected by Gilbert Stanley Underwood, who also designed lodges at other parks, including Yellowstone, Zion, and Bryce Canyon. And the new lodge and log cabins would make it possible for many thousands to travel a long distance to the North Rim and enjoy overnight accommodations. And it was constructed by the Utah Parks Company, which was a subsidiary of the Union Pacific Railroad. The lodge was originally referred to as the Union Pacific Lodge. Not too many people know that. Well, in those early days, it was really difficult to get construction materials to the North Rim, a journey of 100 miles from the nearest railway. In the springtime, the roads became so soft that it became impossible to bring in more materials at times, which delayed construction. Sometimes they tried to go over the roads at night when they would be more firm, but eventually it really delayed things. They had to bring in horses and wagons from Kanab, Utah, to haul lighter loads around the quagmires that were still there. And about the new lodge, it was reported, quote, "This hotel will contain large lounging rooms, recreation hall, storeroom, dining room that will seat 200 persons, kitchen and a cold storage plant, shower, baths, and accessories. 62 guest lodges of log construction will be provided." Well, the stones for the original lodge came from a quarry, limestone quarry, about 2 miles north of the lodge, and logs came from the pines in the nearby forest. Well, to provide water and electricity, was needed for the lodge. A hydroelectric plant was constructed nearly 4,000 feet down into the canyon near Roaring Springs. It had two 100 horsepower turbines linked to generators. So what they did is they brought water from Bright Angel Creek coming down into the canyon, and they dammed it, and then sent the water. The water flowed through wooden penstock tubes or troughs, and then the water generated the electricity for the pump house to lift water and send electricity up to the North Rim. So they need a lot of construction materials to be brought down, and doing that by mule would take forever. So a 2-mile tramway was powered by a big steam engine, was constructed to bring down equipment and building materials for the powerhouse and the pump house, both of which would stand for the next 50 years. And the top of the tram was located near the present-day North Kaibab trailhead. And I think there still are some traces of that there. 17 towers had to be constructed to hold the very heavy cable that would come down. So you see that the top of the tram down at the bottom near Roaring Springs, and somebody having fun taking a ride down the tram. Creating the water pipeline up from Roaring Springs was a gigantic task, and at the time it was believed to be the highest lift in the world for any water supply system. Pipe sections 22 feet long took 10 men to carry and put into place down the steep cliffs. And so the water line is this one here, and of course you see the electric lines also. The only death during construction occurred on October 31st, 1927. Philo Carter Anderson of Beaver, Utah, working on the pipeline, wore some new slick shoes, and he fell headfirst to 300 feet, being entangled in a rope while a pipe was being lowered. And he died instantly. And there were other accidents and injuries experienced by others. And one quote in the newspaper said, These were the risks so that Mr. and Mrs. John Q. Public could have a hot shower at the end of a day spent in the viewing of the majesty of the Grand Canyon from vantage points of its numerous trails." So they considered it worth it, I get, for all the accidents that would take place. Well, the spectacular lodge was designed to look like it rose out of the Grand Canyon's rocky cliffs. It was written, so clearly has the design been worked out, and the lodge will appear more as a work of nature than a construction by man. This effect will be retained and enhanced by the material from which the lodge is built, native stone, matching in texture and color with the rocky rim of the canyon which it surmounts. Construction during 1927, the Utah Parks Company workers were paid 50 to 80 cents per hour. And it was said, quote, no genie of Arabian Nights lore was ever called upon to perform as difficult feats as were the builders of the Grand Canyon Lodge. Through the winter, they had to use giant rotary snowplow to push by a 20-ton tractor to keep the road open to the north rim through the great giant drifts of snow as high as 20 feet deep. There were more than 200 men, women, and children at the lodge construction camp who relied on these supplies that needed to be continually brought in. No stores there at the north rim. So here's some construction photos of the original lodge. Of course, you see the sunroom being put together, and also here construction of the different points. This one's a view of from the veranda, looking up the stairway that comes down. As these people nearly 100 years ago were constructing that lodge. And here's some more. I think this is from the windows from the dining room. And again, you can see construction going on there and there. So a giant sunroom was created with 3 huge view windows and a terrace with a big open fireplace. And that fireplace, actually still stands. An observation tower was built that in the lodge, and that's this tower here. And it was only in the original lodge, and it was reached by a big stone stairway. And at the top of the lodge was a large telescope that guests could use to view the majesty of the canyon. Also at night, they had a giant searchlight that was used from the tower to light up the canyon walls at night. Well, visitors would not stay overnight in the lodge. Instead, they would stay in cabins that were built nearby. So small cabins, and these were the small cabins being built, and then also large deluxe cabins were constructed near the lodge. This is a large cabin that hung right at the rim there. The original Grand Canyon Lodge was open to the public on June 5th, 1928, and deluxe buses started to run from the railroad station at Cedar City, Utah, to the North Rim. And it was reported the lodge combines the luxuries and comforts of the most modern hotelry with many desires, romances, thrills, and fascinations of the wilderness set against the background of the famous Grand Canyon. So the second story of this original lodge, you can see here, was used primarily as a dormitory for the lodge employees. It seems like it was mostly the women that were waitresses or cleaned rooms would stay there. And here's a frontal view of that original lodge, which is really nice. And you can see the tower there. So the lodge was formally dedicated on September 15th, 1928. A large delegation of 200 dignitaries from 4 states gathered in the main dining room of the lodge. and huge plate glass windows permitted a view of the sheer mile drop off. And the National Park Service Director, Stephen T. Mather, was master of ceremonies. And the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Heber J. Grant, was the last speaker. And Mormons played a big role in developing the North Rim. And Mather commented during his speech about the contribution of the Utah Mormons, men and boys, who built the lodge. Well, the Utah Parks Company would operate the North Rim facilities and take over the Wiley Way camp. Most of the employees at the lodge were young men and women from Utah colleges recommended by their faculty. The students did all the work, acting as clerks, porters, chambermaids, waiters and waitresses, chauffeurs and guides. It was reported these young people put on a literary and musical program in the presence of at least 500 guests that for excellence we have not seen surpassed for a long time. And the leader and director of the affair was a young girl not over 18 years of age, a student employee, and a waitress in the dining room. One feature of the program was her leading the entire audience, guests and all, in singing old folk songs. So they really had a great time in the lodge in those early years. Well, the lodge quickly became a favorite location to hold really big conventions for clubs and companies, and employees would gather for stingaways. It became a tradition for a long time there at the North Rim as the guests departed on their buses. Here's here in the National Archives, I found this. It's a 1932 aerial view of the North Rim with the lodge and the cabins. So you see the lodge, the original lodge here with its tower. You see the small cabins here and the deluxe cabins over here. What's interesting about this photo is just two months later, it all changed, as I'll tell you next. On September 1st, 1932, at 4 a.m., a kitchen fire broke out at the lodge. And as the chief chef was preparing breakfast for the employees, sparks flew and a blaze started. He quickly sounded the alarm. The lodge desk clerk said, there was hardly enough time for us to get started to put it under control before it was blazing in every room. 20 young women from Provo, Utah, employed as waitresses, fled the dormitory on the second floor with 26 rooms, still dressed in their night clothes. It was reported the guests in the adjoining cabins were aroused, and many volunteered in preventing the spread of the flames to the 68 cabins situated around the central lodge. The flames spread so rapidly that it was impossible to save the personal effects of the employees and the rich furnishings in the building. Occupants of 2 burned deluxe cabins lost personal belongings, and in their haste to reach safety when the flames spread to the quarters. So they lost the lodge, they lost, which had its post office there and shops, and two of the deluxe cabins also were burned down. Within 90 minutes after the fire was discovered, the lodge was a raging inferno. It's reported sparks carried by a slight wind traveled for several blocks, igniting timber and threatened to wipe out the tourist colony. So more than 160 people battled the flames, including rangers, employees, bus drivers, visitors, and workers from nearby construction camps. Wet blankets were draped over nearby cabins, preventing the fire from spreading. And the blaze was visible for 13 miles away from the South Rim. Superintendent Minor Tillotson, thinking it was a forest fire, flew over in a plane at daylight and discovered the devastating damage. The fire left the lodge in a smoldering mass of charred logs and cracked masonry. The loss included the curio shop, cafeteria, amusement hall, park offices, post office, and is estimated to be valued at $500,000, but was mostly covered by insurance. But they kept the North Rim open because of the campground still there and the cabins that were still there. So the North Rim remained open for the rest of the season until October 1st. There was a strong desire to have the lodge rebuilt, just as we have that desire today. And they wanted to do as quickly as possible, but this was during the Great Depression. And visitors declined at the park during the Depression years, and the Union Pacific knew that it'd be difficult to economically maintain a new large lodge during that time. So they built a temporary lodge that was opened to receive visitors starting in 1934. It had been a dormitory and a dining hall for employees, and it was renovated to receive visitors. It rivaled the beauty of the original lodge on a smaller scale and included a cafeteria, recreation hall for the cabins. For nearly 4 years, the lodge ruins stood undisturbed, with stone columns standing as sentinels, and you can see them in the behind these singways. So in July 1936, work began on building a new lodge designed by Union Pacific architect W.T. Wellman. And the goal was to build it in less than 1 year, if you can believe it. It used some of the original stonework and was built in the exact same place as on the rim as the original lodge. With concerns about fire suppression, the plans were reviewed by a fire control expert in Washington, D.C. They didn't want to see the same thing happen that happened a few years earlier. So the Ryberg Brothers Construction Company of Salt Lake City received the winning bid of about $100,000 to build the lodge under the direction of the Utah Parks Company, the Union Pacific. About 180 men were employed to work on the project, chosen from 3,000 applicants, during these 1930s. Because appropriate lumber had to be brought in further away from when the lodge was first built, the cost of the project went up by about $30,000. When construction began, they discovered that there were problems with the surviving stonework. Many of the stones, these limestone stones, would fall or break apart when they tried to reuse them, and that happens when you superheat the limestones and the mortar that is used. So they had to tear down nearly all the stones and put some of them back up. Still, they were able to salvage and reuse many of the original stones. And here we have some more construction photos of the new lodge going on there. So as you see, a big difference is there's no tower was put, and the roofs were better sloped for winter, and there wasn't it wasn't the big second story dormitory was also not put in there. So here's another interesting then and now comparison of a view of the veranda. And I mentioned the fireplace that was constructed and the architect wanted there. And so here's the old lodge superimposed on the new lodge. And you see it fits pretty well, no tower. They made some changes, going into the sunroom and so forth. But as far as the veranda there, things and the fireplace, things were pretty much the same. In September 1936, that temporary lodge caught fire from unknown origin, and it had been used as the workers' dormitory and also the tourist dining hall. It took 3 hours to bring the flames under control and to make sure that they didn't spread to the forest. About 100 workers were on site. No one was injured, but the building was a complete loss and valuable kitchen equipment was destroyed. One worker said that they were lucky to save their clothes and their lives. On November 1936, the exterior was nearly complete and work started on the interior. But because it was late in the season, snow and cold weather delayed the progress. Well, 12 feet of snow fell in just 3 weeks during December, and the 45-mile road to Jacob Lake became impassable, and the workers could not return home for Christmas. All were holed up at the lodge. The snow was so deep that snowplows failed to break the trail all the way to the rim. So they were marooned. Initial reports indicated the workers at the lodge were fine. The Union Pacific said they were suffering no discomfort, but anxiously awaited the road to be opened. They believed that they had enough food for 2 months and had daily telephone communication over a private line with the Union Pacific, although that phone line didn't last. The Union Pacific reported they are going right on with their work. If we had to, we would get them out through the canyon and up to the south rim, or we could drop them food and snowshoes from airplanes, and they could follow experienced guides to Kanab, Utah. So the telephone communication eventually failed to the lodge, and by late January 1937, the temperature dipped to 20 below zero. So these are actual pictures of these plows and these roads, trying to make their way to the lodge and bring others out in other places too. So there were other snowbound people that needed to be rescued from ranches outside of the park. People were marooned at VT Ranch, which was a tourist camp located about 18 miles north of the lodge. A big rotary snowplow broke down trying to clear 20-foot drifts on the road from Jacob Lake. A sled that was sent out also broke down. So parts for the broken machines were ordered and sent by airplane to the South Rim. The only plane at the Grand Canyon Airport was damaged when it was removed from the hangar and was unable to make the trip to bring in the supplies. So the alarming story was covered nationwide daily, especially because Alberta Cox, the wife of the VT ranch manager, Carl Cox, was 8 months pregnant. And they were almost out of food. They were eating salmon and popcorn. So it's almost like, you watch the Apollo 13 movie where everybody was just praying for these poor astronauts to be rescued. I think the same feeling was there, thinking about these people that were stranded and marooned near the South Rim, near the North Rim. Well, in mid-February 1937, two lodge workers hiked the 18 miles north to VT Ranch on homemade snowshoes to bring word of the plight of those marooned at the lodge. They believed that the lodge crew would run out of food on March 1st. No one there had communicated with their families at home since the day after Christmas, and many of the men had been working at the North Rim for 8 months. Carl Cox hiked a mile from VT Ranch in snowdrifts, climbed a telephone pole, plugged in his portable set to the TransCanyon phone line, which had recently been patched in 57 places to Jacob Lake. Cox reported that if the plows did not make it to VT Ranch and the lodge soon, they would need food drops by plane. Well, telephone contact was soon restored to the lodge, and after construction material had run out, Doyle Smith, one of the lodge workers, said, we have food, but it's running low. We read and listen to the radio, play cards, and just sit around. Some of the boys made skis and snowshoes and walked down the North Kaibab Trail to see if we could get out that way. And they found the snow was bad, only a mile and a half down the trail. Well, road crews worked furiously both day and night to clear the road with the repaired plow, but progress was slow as more snow fell. Dynamite was used to blast a giant solid ice block 12 feet high that blocked their way. On February 18th, the rescuers reached VT Ranch, and the Coxes were taken to Kanab, Utah. And she gave birth to her child 2 months later, so she still had time. Attention next turned to rescuing the workers at the lodge. And so the workers at the lodge had to conduct their own rescue operation. Down at Roaring Springs was a couple maintaining the powerhouse. They were Albert White and his wife, Olivia White, of Cedar City, Utah, and their 17-month-old daughter, Janice. The Whites had worked at Roaring Springs for 3 summers, but during this 1937 winter, they stayed to make sure that electricity and water continued to be sent up to the lodge as construction was continued. So Robert Holmes, age 16, of Rock Springs, Wyoming, was one of their rescuers who trudged through the snow 1.5 miles to the North Kaibab trailhead and then went down the North Kaibab Trail. And it was reported, according to Mr. Holmes, icicles weighing many tons had formed on the canyon walls, and as they broke off and fell, they sounded like a roar of a cannon. Great boulders were continually tearing down the steep slopes, and avalanches of mud and smaller rocks were nearly obliterated the trail. Well, the men took turns carrying the toddler up, and a tarp was used to cover Olivia and Janice over at least a dozen places where the melting snow roared over their heads in waterfalls. And at the top, all but Janice were cut and bleeding from falling rocks. Olivia White said, "It was a hard trip, and we were frightened, but none of us suffered any bad effects." Well, the snow plow near VT Ranch continued to press on toward the North Rim, and 2 more inches of snow fell with heavy winds. The plow broke down again, and the Utah Parks Company sent out a rescue party on snowshoes to carry 125 pounds of food. Plans were considered sending people across the canyon from the South Rim to see if trail conditions were safe enough to bring everyone out that way. However, Park Superintendent Tillotson discouraged that plan as too dangerous. And the Utah Parks Company wanted to try anyway, pointing out that those from Roaring Springs had made it up to the North Rim safely. So finally, 22 people who were stranded at the lodge with only a few days left of food, on February 21st, 15 of the desperate workers descended down Roaring Springs Canyon, roped together, and they had to cross the icy Bright Angel Creek 6 times before arriving at Phantom Ranch. And the next day, they were taken up to the South Rim on mules, which is happening in this picture here. And Superintendent Tilson said, "I was sure glad to see those boys coming up the trail." Well, a plane finally dropped parts for the broken down snowplow, and on February 22nd, 1937, the plow went in again and successfully arrived near the lodge. And the men on snowshoes also arrived with food. The tractor reached those who remained at the lodge, bringing them 16 miles through the snow-covered road, and automobiles brought them the rest of the way to Jacobs Lake. They got their belated Christmas cards at Kanab and packages, and were glad to be gone. Well, road workers abandoned plans to reopen the highway to the North Rim. New drifting snow had already filled the plowed roads, so they would wait until spring arrived to continue finishing the lodge construction. And the rescue effort cost the Utah Parks Company $4,000. One of the rescued workers, Jimmy Wagner of California, said, "I had never been in snow before and don't want to be in it again." The new lodge was opened on June 1st, 1937, and is better adapted to the winter snow. Much less wood was used because of fire concerns. Steel beams and trusses were used instead of logs. A water line came to the lodge from storage tanks with high pressure for fire suppression. Mr. and Mrs. Charles Fink of Fresno, California, were the first to register in the new lodge. And a visitor wrote, "The new lodge offers luxurious accommodations for the wealthy and also improvements to the existing tourist cabins and a general store. The lounge and dining hall have extremely large windows, which enables one to view the canyon in all its brilliancy and varying moods." Well, for the next 88 years, the stunning lodge was a source of fond memories for visitors and employees at the North Rim. And in 1980, and I won't cover there's so much more that can be talked over the decades of the lodge and what it meant to so many people. But in 1987, it was designated as a National Historic Landmark. And as we know, on July 13th, 2025, a fire called Dragon Bravo, started by lightning 9 days earlier, reached the area and burned down the lodge and more than 100 other structures. Most of those original log cabins and deluxe cabins near the lodge were destroyed. Um, so the loss of the Grand Canyon Lodge, obviously, for the second time, was very devastating to us all. Well, in conclusion, here are a set of photos that illustrate the changes seen on the lodge veranda, because the veranda, which is kind of away from the lodge on fire, has mostly been preserved over the years. And so pay attention to that original fireplace. So here's in 1927, the original lodge. In 1930, again, you see that fireplace and you see the tower up there in the second story. And here's right after the fire in 1932. You can see the veranda here. So the rebuilt lodge in 1949. See out here on the porch here, and the fireplace is around the corner here. And now, Dragon Bravo fire. This is what it looked like right after the lodge was burned down. And you see the fireplace still there in the porch. What does it look today? As best as we can tell, this is what it looks today. Well, most of the lodge today, before the snows came, the stones had to be bulldozed. It looks like the veranda is in place and the whole fireplace there. Sunroom's gone. Moonroom's gone. Well, moonroom's maybe down below. So that is it. What I thought I would share today. I just love the North Rim, and and we do have hopes that it certainly will come back. And we know the national park understands its value and how people want to do it, but we won't cover that in today's session.
Well, I want to thank you, Davy, for an absolutely outstanding presentation and a real treat to see rarely available photos. It's an incredible photo display. And again, I want to remind everyone if you want to ask some questions, I shouldn't say remind, I'll mention the way to ask questions of our speaker. If you're a subscriber, if you actually have an account with Google YouTube, you can put the question uh, at the bottom where you've got the like and the emoji area. Um, but I'm trying to see if I have any showing on I'm following YouTube on the side here. Um, just
But
I'll
yes,
re
I did see one question.
Good, please.
I might have spoke wrong. They came to had the impression that the North Rim was open year round back in those early days, and it
Mhm.
was not. It was similar to what is seasonal today, although there's always been people there year round, especially down at Roaring Springs and other places. Even today, but as far as the general public, it was shut down.
Okay, I had a question about early on about how whether Camp Woolley and Edwin D. Woolley are the same because I noticed there was a double L in Edwin D. Woolley
Um,
and Camp whether it is just was a if there was the spelling was mixed up even in those days the way they
yeah,
spelled it.
it was. There should be two L's.
Okay,
And yeah, if I had it, I made a mistake.
well,
Same person, Edwin D. Willie, and he had a
right.
son that I mentioned, Edwin Gordon Woolley. and he was the Mormon church leader in
Hmm.
Kanab for many years.
Um, Again, everyone, the second part of this talk is readily available in this issue of the Old Pioneer. It's the last issue with that name, well, the Old Pioneer. And Davy's article is the lead article in the magazine. I was following along as you were talking, Davy. You've got all the references here. You can see where the sources are for these incredible photos. Just a marvelous, marvelous piece of historical research and presentation. We had a very large group this evening. I want to thank everyone who joined us. And again, I don't have readily available to see questions. You probably can see them better on the
There's
screen.
another question about, well,
Okay.
what about the development of the North Rim that led to the growth of Jacob Lake? And
Hmm.
fortunately, I haven't researched that. I bet if you went to the inn there at Jacob Lake, that they could probably share a lot of the history of the development. I've always wanted to stay there. I almost did this season. They certainly are suffering a little bit from a lack of
Hmm.
tourists. So if you get a chance, yeah, stop in at the inn there in Jacob Lake and learn about the history of that area.
The owners have been regularly part of interviews by AZ Family Channel 5 in Phoenix. They were interviewed throughout the Dragon Bravo fire in July and August. It's a it is a sad story to see them suffer for economically. The other question I had was about the second. I didn't know there was a different architect for the rebuild of the lodge. I always thought it was uh, Stanley. I always thought it was Underwood and his
Yeah.
firm that did it. But you mentioned another architect, and
Yeah, I just learned that recently myself
okay.
from a presentation given at
Hmm.
one of our symposiums a few
Hmm.
years ago.
Okay.
That did a very nice job and helped me understand that, yeah, there was a different, by the time they did the second launch, there was a different architect, although they received a lot of guidance from the Union Pacific and also the
Hmm.
National Park. National Park really wanted it to stay very much the same as it had been and use, as much of the same stones
Hmm.
and look as it was before.
They'll probably have the same problem. They will have the same problem with
Yes.
limestone, with the rebuild for the because limestone is not entirely fire. It's very sensitive to fire because it's a reactive mineral. A little geology there. I know
Yeah.
Wayne Ranney, our resident geologist, is probably on YouTube, and he might be able to contribute to that observation. But Gilbert Stanley Underwood and the firm, which is based in Los Angeles, as you mentioned, did they did a number of national parks, but also some state parks. They did the architecture at Yosemite and Yellowstone, uh, and then the ones in Utah. So I was surprised to learn that there was another architect that came in. Hopefully, they did consult with the Underwood firm.
So another question is, what's the best resource for photos of the lodge? Probably
Hmm.
the lodge we just lost.
Hmm.
I found that again, I mentioned at the beginning. The Union Pacific was certainly in charge of what was going on. So they have a great online museum that has many pictures, early pictures of the both lodges, and also the Utah Parks company photos are preserved in Southern Utah University in Cedar City, and they have online um, access to, and the national park, of course, does. So
Right.
depends on what you want to see, but there's so many great photos of activities and things that went on in the lodge, and a lot of tourists, and sitting out on the veranda and in the sunroom and so forth. All the memories
Hmm.
and lots of photos of the cabins, the small cabins, deluxe cabins. People had their honeymoons there. I remember a couple months after I was married, we made our first trip to the North Rim to experience it there.
which Utah colleges were the main source of the young co-eds and student workers? I mean, the one in Cedar City you mentioned, that's 150, that's 160 miles away. I actually drove that this fall.
Yeah.
Uh,
I
so
think, I think Brigham Young University supplied
BYU, okay.
quite a few. My aunt in the 1960s went to BYU,
Hmm.
and she worked a summer there. So I had that same question. I haven't found the answer, but
Okay.
I would suspect Brigham Young University and University of Utah certainly
Hmm.
were involved in helping to recruit summer workers.
Okay. I don't know if there's any other questions because I can't see the YouTube.
Yeah, I think that's about it.
And with that, I'm going to thank everyone for joining us this evening and hope you enjoy the rest of your evening and stay safe and stay well. And if you're in the colder climates, stay warm.